Good evening, Chair. It is now 7 o'clock and we are live on YouTube and ready to start the meeting.
Yeah, evening all. Okay, here we go again. So, good evening and welcome everyone to the virtual meeting of the Audit Committee. The meeting is being streamed live on YouTube, so good evening also to any interested viewers that might be joining us. The agenda and associated papers for the meeting are all available on the Council website. To ensure the audio for this meeting sounds as clear as possible to those tuning in, we will be muting all microphones as a default setting to keep background noise to a minimum. When wishing to speak, I'll be grateful if members would raise their hand and wait to be invited to speak by myself. Your microphone will then be unmuted and you will be able to speak. Members will be voting by raising their hand to indicate they are either in favour of the motion, against the motion, or are wishing to abstain. Right, off we go then. There's quite a bit to get through, troops. So, agenda item 1. The agenda item 1 is to receive apologies for absence. So far, I'm aware of an apology from Councillor John Bird. Are there any more?
No, I've not received any more apologies, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Right, agenda item 2. To consider any declaration of disposable pecuniary or personal interests and non-disclosable pecuniary or other interests. Do we have any declarations, please? Can't see. Let me see if I can see everybody.
Nobody's indicating, Chair.
Thank you very much, Eka. Yes. So, chugging along to agenda item 3, which are the minutes of the last meeting on pages 5 through 8. This item is to receive and approve as a correct record the minutes of the meeting held on the 30th November 2020. Can I ask someone to move them, please? I see Councillor Arnie Hankin, thank you. Could I also ask for a seconder? Have we got anybody there?
Councillor Chapman, Chair.
Thank you very much. And does anyone wish to speak in relation to the accuracy of the minutes? Any hands raised? No waving? No?
No.
Okay, can I therefore ask for a show of hands in favour of accepting them? Would you please raise your hand if you're in favour? So I've got Councillor Arnie Hankin, and I'm trying to get everybody else across. Can you check that for me, please, Mike?
Yes, Chair. So we've got Christian Chapman, Councillor Jim Blagden.
And Councillor Arnie Hankin, I saw.
Arnie Hankin, and obviously yourself, Chair. If you'll...
Thank you. So, okay, that's really been carried. Agenda item 4. Here we go, troops. Mazars annual audit letter for the year ending 31 March 2020, which are on pages 9 through 26 of your pack. Could I please ask one of the representatives from Mazars to present their report, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'll talk you through this paper. So this is the final paper in respect of our audit work for the year ended March 20. There isn't a great deal of new material in here, colleagues. You'll recall when I saw you in October with our audit completion report, there were just a few matters of outstanding from an audit point of view. This document just really pulls it all together. So I'll take it as read. I think the important things for you to note on page 11, it just really gives you the overall conclusions on all of the aspects of our work, and you'll see from all of the green on that page, positive assurance opinion. So that's pleasing from that point of view. Section 2, again, just takes you through those significant risks. I think you recall when we saw you in October, there was still just some work to do around the pension scheme. We were still waiting for information from the scheme auditors. I think we put you on notice that actually, because both the scheme auditors and your asset valuers were having difficulty valuing assets in a pandemic, it was likely there would be some mention of that in your audit opinion. So the accounts that were signed just before Christmas in the audit report, and it's not a qualified audit report, just draw the reader's attention to the challenges that everybody had last year in terms of valuing assets. And that's consistent across the piece, just by way of peer comparison. That was the approach taken with all of the Nottinghamshire districts. Section 3 covers off our work on value for money. You'll see clean opinions there on both financial sustainability and your investment property strategy. I think, Chair, the one thing I would just draw to your attention on page 21, again, without being any issue of a qualification, really is just bringing your attention to the fact that the playing fields are changing around local authority and investment property strategies, and actually a suggestion there that you need to continue to keep that under review going forwards. And I think that ties quite neatly into a paper you have on later on in the agenda. So I'd pause there, Chair, and take any questions on that paper.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions or wish to speak? Would you please indicate?
Councillor Chapman. Chair.
Christian? Councillor Chapman, you wish to, have you, yeah, could we unmute Councillor Chapman, please?
Yeah, no, again, it was a lot of reading, but it was good. It laid it out. I didn't find anything particularly worrying in it, and I do thank Mazars for bringing, doing the work and the rest of it. It's been good to see that, again, the council's doing what it should be doing, and that we've got effectively a clean bill of health from yourselves. So I'm glad to see that's reported. That's the only comments I've got, really.
Thank you, Christian. Yeah, I also reading on page 21 about the reform to public works, loan board, borrowing, etc., etc. But just to echo Councillor Chapman's thanks, excellent report. Thanks. There's no other hands raised. Could I please ask you now to have a show of hands to note the annual letter as presented? Can I please have a show of hands, please? Councillor Hankin, are you with us? Thank you, sir. Yep, that's fine. Unanimous. Thank you. That's been carried. Agenda item 5, Mazars Audit Strategy Memorandum, year ending 31 March 2021, which is on page 27 to 60. Can I please ask again for one of the representatives from Mazars to present their report?
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through this one again. So just to prove we're in a world of perpetual audit at the moment, we finish one year and go straight into the next one.
Yes.
So this is our audit planning document for the year ending March 21. I think actually in terms of content, it's very similar to what you'll have seen from us in previous years, hidden by a new brand, I will admit. So that's probably why it looks slightly different. I think one of the things I should draw to your attention, in section 3, page 36, we set out the audit timelines, which are aiming to having signed accounts by September, which is the deadline for this year. Hopefully, with everybody being much more used to working in this current climate, we should be able to achieve that deadline. Section 4 again draws out those key significant risks for you to look at. I think the thing to note is there is nothing new emerging from our planning discussions with Pete and Bev. They're the same risks as last year. Where there are changes in the document is in section 5, which sets out our work on value for money, where there have been changes in the audit code this year, and set out in a fair bit of detail there, where historically I think our audit opinion would have just commented if we'd have found anything. Now the onus is on us to report in a lot more detail and a lot more free form around those headings that are set out there on page 44 and subsequent, really. So that's going to be a challenge for us as auditors this year. What it will do more positively is put the onus on us to report as and when we find things, rather than necessarily waiting to the point we get to the annual opinion at the end of the year. So if there are matters arising, we will be feeding back to you very quickly on those. But again, it's more of a free-form reporting style under those headings that are set out there. So I think that will be a challenge for both management and auditors in year one, as there ever is when there's a change. And of course, Chair, that unfortunately has a knock-on impact into our fees. So you'll see in section 6, there are some proposed fees in there reflecting the additional work that we're having to do in these and other areas. They are proposed at this moment in time. There are ongoing discussions between ourselves and all of the Nottingham districts just to ensure that everybody has a consistent approach, and clearly PSAA as the contract awarders are involved in the discussion as well. So it's a fairly quiet document, Chair, other than that narrative around our work on value for money. So again, I'll just pause and take questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Anyone wish to ask any? I see head shaking. No, nothing there. Well, thank you once again.
Thank you.
Okay. Can I ask for a show of hands to know that the audit strategy memorandum as presented? Are we all in agreement with that, please? David, yeah, yep. Yep, unanimously carried. Thank you very much. Pause for breath. Here we go again. Agenda item 6, capital strategy, pages 61 to 100. Audit committee members are being asked to 1, review and note the contents of the capital strategy CS for 2021 to 22, including annexes 1 through 3. And second point, to recommend that Cabinet and Council approves the capital strategy, the commercial property investment strategy, and commercial property indicators. Can I please ask Pete or Bev to present their report?
Thank you, Chair. It's me presenting the report.
Hello, Bev.
Hi. So we're required to produce the capital strategy under the SITFA Prudential Code of Practice, and then we're also required to have the commercial property investment strategy under the statutory MHCLG statutory investment guidance. So the report is an annual report that we bring to Audit Committee. So it is mainly a refresh and a review rather than any significant changes to it. So I won't go through the whole document in detail. I'll just draw the attention to the changes that have been made this year. So the main change is in relation to the fact that we've removed capital property investment from our future capital programme, which is a result of the changes to the PWLB consultation and the new lending terms, which have basically said that if an authority was lending, undertaking capital investment for yield, which includes property investment, then it wouldn't have access to the PWLB. And under the new lending term, they've reduced the PWLB rate by 1%. So to ensure that we've still got access to that reduced rate, we've taken that out of our future capital programme. So that's reflected throughout the strategy. The other sections that have been updated for are in section 8. Section 8 till 11 outline sort of categories of capital expenditure that are included in our capital programme. So in that, we've now added section 12, which is additional expenditure for economic and regeneration schemes, and we've also added in section 13, which is about loans to third parties. So the economic and regeneration has been added in relation to the fact that in the future we'll have schemes being added as a result of the future high street funding in the towns fund. So that would constitute economic and regeneration projects. And then we've also just added in loans to third parties, just to acknowledge and to make sure that the strategy is fit for purpose. At the moment, we've got no provision in a capital programme to give loans to third parties, but it would enable us to if we needed to in the future. And then the last sort of section of the report goes on to look at the non-treasury performance indicators. So again, they're important in relation to the commercial property investment strategy. So although we've got no future commercial investment strategy, we've still obviously got to monitor our existing portfolio and the impact that that has on the performance indicators. So I can just go through some of the indicators that are included. Just bear with me a minute while I get to that page. They start on page 86 of the agenda pack. So if I just draw your attention to table 2, that's got the commercial income to net service expenditure. So obviously that's looking at how much the commercial investment contributes towards our net service expenditure. So it's obviously running at about 33% and will continue to be at that level. So obviously that was the intention when we pursued this as a strategy. But also that means that on an ongoing basis, we now need to keep monitoring that in relation to risk mitigation to maintain that income stream. And tables 5 and 6, 6 and 7 just also outline the level that we're currently getting for our investment property income in relation to the MTFS position. So that's obviously we're sort of just around the £3 million mark. So happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Bev. I've just got one question myself, if I may refer you to page 87. And the next to the last sentence there, it says in 2019 to 20, the purchase of investment properties was £39.
Yeah,
Very
sorry,
cheap.
that's a mistype. It should say 39 million. The M's
Oh,
been
that's-
come off. So yeah, sorry about that. It should be 39 million.
I thought we were getting away with something cheap for that. Getting a Lego second hand. Okay, so does anyone wish to speak? Has anybody got any questions? I see Councillor Chapman. Could we unmute Councillor Chapman, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. You actually stole one of the points I was actually going to make. That's one of the ones I noted as well. I've also got it most of 39 pounds. Is this correct? Yeah, so that was one. But the other one is actually, I mean, it comes back to that obviously, you know, no further capital investment into properties and the rest of it. Obviously, that was a strategy that we're using to like look at funding shortfalls. So where are we leading with that? In case, I mean, what impact has that now got on our future income streams? Because obviously, you know, that was a big part of, you know, our future sort of ways forward. I'm probably just going to go to Pete this one. But...
So is Pete going to volunteer?
I am, yes, Chair.
Off you go.
So yes, you're quite right, Councillor Chapman. It was a key element of our methodology for closing the funding gap in the medium-term financial strategy, but it was one of several. So we still have the annual service reviews, which we are stacking up, which hopefully will lead to some savings. But the big one that is expected to deliver savings going forward is the digital services transformation strategy. So we are expecting some significant savings starting to come through during the course of 2021-22. And at this stage, we haven't even considered those as part year savings in setting the budget for next year. So by the time we get through to the end of next year, we should be in a position whereby we're going to get full year effect savings from 22-23. So that will be a key element. Like I said, there's some service reviews that we're going to be looking at. And within those service reviews, we're also going to be considering key operating models and whether or not there's anything we should change around those. So one of them is whether or not we're going to do anything around the way we deliver our waste collection and disposal function at the moment. But it's a longer term review. That's not something that's going to be done overnight. But that's just to give you an idea of the sort of things that we're going to be looking at.
Yeah.
Are you okay with that, Christian?
No.
No.
To be honest.
Off you go, sir.
I mean, again, it's the sort of thing. I mean, I know, because obviously I'm deeply involved in digital services transformation. I mean, it is actually getting some quicker wins than what we thought. Joe will know about this. But to rely on that as a major arm in closing the funding gap, I would put as quite a concern. I know you're sort of saying about other services, but this seems to be going backwards on our strategy previously, that, you know, we can't just be looking at efficiency savings and salami slicing to cover this funding gap. We, you know, the government has in the past, you know, sort of saying, you know, we've got to look at alternative funding. Now, I know this one's been withdrawn from us, so they are kind of like speaking with, you know, sort of from both sides of the mouth on this, on what we're supposed to do. But we do need to start, well, I feel from this point, we are in danger of slipping, you know, into having to make stuff, forced into making cuts or somehow savings that way. I know we don't want to cut services. I definitely don't want to see us cutting services. So to me, from this point, you know, we've got to start looking at what else can we do, you know, against something innovative like we did before to do this. I don't think just saying we're going to save is good enough effectively.
Okay, yeah, well, I hear what you're saying, Christian. Peter, you or Bev or anyone, has anybody got anything to add to that before we move on?
Yeah, it's like I said, I mean, the service reviews are things that are going to contribute savings. But there's also the income side in terms of looking at our fees and charges, whether or not we're going to increase those into the future by levels greater than inflation where we're able to do so. I think part of the service reviews, there will inevitably have to be a degree of focus on the services where we provide them that are discretionary and where a number of other authorities aren't currently providing them. And depending on what the final settlement looks like going forward from government in terms of central government funding, and that's obviously going to be impacted by the outcome of the Fair Funding Review, the level of business rates retention, business rates reset, level of RSG, and changes to new homes bonus funding, which originally we should have known about ready for April this year, but because of the pandemic, it's been pushed back a year. So we won't have that degree of certainty until next year. Once we've got that idea, we will know more about the true level of funding gap that we're faced with. So at that point, we'll be able to determine the extent to which we need to start looking through the service reviews at the discretionary services that we provide.
Okay, thank you, Pete. Well, can we move on now?
Sorry,
could
Chair,
I please
we've
ask
got
for removal
Councillor
from
Shaw.
recommendations?
Sorry, Chair, we've got Councillor Shaw who wants to speak.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dave, I didn't see you there. Off you go, mate.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Pete, for that. We've spoken about the Challenge Fund, the Regeneration Fund, and the impacts of the risk of that, or lack of knowledge of what's coming in the pipeline. And we're on about salami slicing services. I'm more concerned about the local development plan that's not been mentioned. We've got that we've been at that now 15, nearly 20 years. We need to get that sorted out, and that's a major risk to this authority if we don't get that sorted out. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, gentlemen, I can't see any more hands right now. Christian's waving. Do you want to come back quickly, Christian? We've got to move on, please.
Yeah, I know. Sorry. Again, it comes back. Discretionary services to our residents and the rest of it. Again, I don't see that as a viable sort of thing. You know, we can't just like be squeezing our current customers more and more and more to sort of cover the funding gap. I do think, you know, we have got to look at investments, whether the government doesn't likes it or not. You know, the councils are going to have to be, you know, if they're wanting us to do the services that they are demanding for us to do, councils have got to look at other revenue streams other than central government and squeezing our residents for more cash out of them. That is not a viable future.
Okay, Christian. So, but as is, could we ask for a mover for the recommendations, please? Is anyone prepared to move these recommendations? Show of hands from anyone. I see Councillor Jim Blagden. Thank you, sir. You're a gentleman. And could I have a seconder, please? And Councillor Arnie Hankins. Thank you, sir. And can we have a show of hands, please? Clearly raise your hands if you're for this. So, anyone against? No, abstained. Well, that's been clearly carried. Thank you very much. Okay, turning on another piece of paper, agenda item 7, Treasury Management Strategy, which is pages 101 through 140 in your pack. Audit committee members are being asked, point 1, to review and note the contents of the Treasury Management Strategy, TMS, for 2021 and 22. To recommend to Cabinet that they approve the Treasury Management Policy Statement incorporating point 1 or A, Treasury Management Strategy Statement, TMSS, the Borrowing Strategy, the Annual Investment Strategy, the Minimum Revenue MRP Policy, Prudential Indicators and Treasury Management Indicators, and Treasury Management Practices and Risk Management. So can I please ask Pete or Bev to present the report, please?
Again, Chair, it's me presenting the report.
Oh, you've won the lucky dip again, Bev.
I have, yes. Again, then, so the report's required under the SITFA Treasury Management Code of Practice for local authorities, and again, it complies with the MHCLG guidance on investment strategy, and the guidance on the MRP policy as well. So that's why the strategy has to be produced. So in line with the covering report, it draws your attention to the operational boundary and the authorised limit. So both of those are influenced by our overall capital financing requirement, which in turn is influenced by the level of borrowing that's in our capital programme. So at the same time as this report goes and the capital strategy goes, the revised capital programme will also be going to Council Cabinet and to then on to full council. And again, the main influence obviously on that is the fact that the commercial investment strategy or future commercial investment has come out of the capital programme. So as I've drawn attention to before, in relation to the operational boundary and the authorised limit, you're interested in what our overall level of debt is in relation to those two limits. So because of our internal borrowing position, we're actually quite below our operational boundary and authorised limit. So we've not really got any perceived future issues regarding those two limits. In relation to the minimum revenue provision, the change that has been included in the provision, that policy, is just to again make reference to the fact that we've included the fact that you can give third-party loans. So if we did do that, that constitutes capital expenditure, which therefore would mean that you'd have to provide MRP for it. But under the policy, we'd change that to say that you actually take the capital receipt that comes back in as the principal repayment on the loan. So you don't actually make an MRP. So you're not converting revenue to capital, basically, which is obviously you don't want to do under the circumstances where we've got pressures on revenue. And then in relation to the content of the report, in relation to sort of our borrowing strategy and investment strategy, there's been no real sort of influence or changes in those overall policies or procedures from previous years. So obviously the policy outlines our potential borrowing parties and where we'd get that borrowing from. So obviously it's our intention that we'd be probably doing that through the PWLB now they've lowered the percentage rate. But obviously we'll keep under review the alternative providers of borrowing as well to make sure that is the optimum value for money. And in relation to our investment strategy, again, there's been no sort of changes to our counterparty limits or the types of counterparties that we use. So we use money market funds and fixed term deposits with bank account, banks or building societies, which are all have got the required credit limits or credit references and get monitored by our Treasury advisors. So there's been no changes to any of those policies or procedures. Then in relation to prudential indicators, again, I just draw your attention to the ones that are included in the covering report. So it just talks about two of the indicators are looking at the impact of your increased borrowing. So you in relation to the impact on the council tax band D property, and also in relation to the impact on rent. So in relation to rents, there isn't any impact because we've got no, we're not intending to do any borrowing in relation to the HRA, so there's no impact on rents. And in relation to council tax, it does draw out what the implications are of the current capital programme would be on that. But although it's a required indicator to include that, in reality, it's not falling on council taxpayers because that increase in the capital programme is actually being financed by the new leisure operator contract. So we've gone into a positive position. So they're actually contributing towards our revenue position, and that's covering the actual increase in borrowing, which is why obviously the leisure developments have been put in. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, thanks for the report, Bev. Could I just draw my fellow committee members' attention to page 112? There was a question about training for the committee members. That it is mentioned on there on paragraph 110.3, and it says audit committee training needs will be considered as part of the tender evaluation and arranged in accordance with the new contract, and this all about the delivery of training. So it hasn't been forgotten, troops. It's in there. Okay. Does anyone wish to speak? Do anyone have any questions? I see Councillor Christian Chapman, and I think that's about all I can see at the moment.
Yeah,
over to you, Christian.
yeah. Sorry, it is actually. I just want to make sure I've actually got that right. So, with you talk about the impact of the capital investments on that. So, you're saying that's actually all of our investments. So both the commercial properties and the Kirkby Leisure Centre is lumped into that figure that you're giving us on page 103. Is that correct? Making sure, because I was reading this earlier on and
no, because it's only it's about your future investment that you're putting forward. So obviously we've now taken out the commercial investment properties. So our borrowing need going forward, which is included in the report, let me just find the table.
Right.
Is all to do with the leisure investment.
Right. Okay. So that's all down to the leisure. Okay,
yes.
That's fine. So then the follow-up question for that one is: so does that consider all of the cost of the leisure centre, or is that minus the grants that I believe we're getting?
Minus the grant, so it's just it's in relation to the borrowing. So yeah, I mean there is probably a little bit of other schemes that have got borrowing in, like there's a rolling programme for vehicle replacements that's through borrowing, so that will be in there, but the significant amount is the leisure centres.
Okay, yeah, because I was thinking if that's minus the grants, well, not including the grants, it seemed a bit low. So there we are. Okay, fine, that's it. Just wanted to clarify because I wasn't quite.
Okay, thank you. Can I now ask if we have a mover for the recommendations? Would somebody move those? Thank you, Councillor Jim Blackdale. And do we have a seconder, please? And Councillor Arnie Hankin, thank you very much, sir. So we'll now move to the vote. And can I ask you all to clearly raise your hands for the motion? That's unanimous. Then the vote has been carried. Thank you very much. Pause for breath. Quick slurp. Okay, moving on to agenda item 8. Just bear with me a second while I negotiate a few pages here. Right, we're back in business. Agenda item 8, corporate risk update, and that's shown on page 141 to 214 of your pack. Members are being asked to 1, note the current significant items on the register and to consider whether any further immediate actions are necessary to mitigate those risks. Item 2, to endorse the updated corporate risk strategy and new appetite framework prior to cabinet approval. So can I please now ask Joe to present the report? Over to you, Joe.
Thank you, Chair. If it's okay with everyone, because there's a report and 3 attached documents, I've rattled up half a dozen slides just to try and pull it together into in one place. If that's okay, just give me a sec to.
Yeah.
Okay, can everybody see that?
Yeah, I can.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, so the report brings to members' attention the usual discussion around the corporate risk register, the current position, and opportunity for members of the audit committee to review particularly the significant risks on the corporate risk register, and to feed back in terms of whether there are any, you deem there to be any further mitigating actions or immediate actions that are required, particularly in relation to significant risks. For this report as well, I wanted to bring to the attention of members the updates that we've made to the corporate risk strategy, and also to present to you for endorsement prior to cabinet approval a new risk appetite framework. So I thought the easiest place to start is in relation to risk management audits in the past, and just the one recommendation that has been outstanding for a while, which will make Mandy smile because I know we've discussed it on numerous occasions, is their recommendation to us to actually to bring something into place that would help us to understand what our risk appetite is. We've now done that. You have presented with you in the pack a new risk appetite framework, and I'll just go through that in a couple of slides in a minute. The other piece of audit work that's been completed really recently was it wasn't a formal audit, it was a piece of advisory sort of consultancy review work that we requested CMAP undertake for us in relation to our social landlord role and in regards to management and reporting of health and safety risks. A couple of recommendations have come out of that piece of consultancy work that tie into the corporate risk framework and our risk strategy and approaches. So one of those was that it would be helpful for us to more clearly define what a corporate risk is and when a risk becomes a corporate risk. So we've now picked that up in our risk strategy. We've got more clarification in that regard. And just to note for members that taking into account any social landlord risk, we're going to review those in line with the changes to the corporate risk strategy. The other element, the other recommendation that ties into corporate risk framework is about when we remove things from the corporate risk register. So not only how do we identify what's a corporate risk, but when do we actually when's the right time to remove something from the corporate risk register. So what we've actually done is we agreed with CMAP that when something is being mitigated or is no longer a risk, but and is not actually making any impact on delivery of corporate objectives, then we take a decision to remove the risk from the risk register. But if it is a low level scoring risk, but it's still potentially having an impact on us achieving our corporate objectives, it won't be removed from the register, and that will give members at Cabinet and Audit Committee the opportunity to still review that risk and our response to that risk. So moving on, the new risk appetite framework, really excited that we've actually developed this now. The document, it's not too lengthy, but just in a nutshell, just wanted to bring to your attention. One of the key things is that we've actually defined what risk appetite is. So it's the level of risk that we're willing to take on or tolerate or be exposed to. The document also clarifies different risk appetite levels. So they're on the left-hand side, hungry, open, cautious, that sort of thing. And then the blue box that's on this slide is our preferred risk appetite levels. So having an open appetite to risk, and we've also set out in our framework what we expect to be acceptable upper risk limits for certain types of risk. So open risk appetite for operational and finance risk is the maximum that we would accept. So we're not looking for a hungry appetite at all for any types of risks. And a cautious risk appetite is what you would expect for any sort of legal regulatory risks, reputational risks, and commercial risks. So that's what we're presenting as the preferred risk appetite levels for certain types of risk. The appetite framework also then describes our tolerance to risk and at what level those types of risks would be monitored. So you can see the matrix on the left-hand side of the screen, and our scoring matrix is sort of what we call 6x4. So anything that falls into the red areas of the matrix, particularly anything, as you can see, I've labelled A or B, they are particularly high risks and would need to be on the corporate risk register and monitored on a regular basis by corporate leadership team. Anything that sits with a score of between 5 and 12 is still a medium level of risk and would be deemed to be corporate risk if it is impacting on our corporate objectives. The document itself goes into scores lower than that, but I just wanted to bring to your attention at committee those that are sort of the higher scoring risks and our intended approach in terms of tolerance and monitoring those risks. And then moving forward, the changes that we've made to the risk strategy, both aligned to the new risk appetite framework. We've now incorporated, as I've already discussed, the matrix in terms of how we determine what's a corporate risk and how often we monitor those risks. We've also included in the strategy more detail around risk definition or risk types, sort of like a categorization of risk. You'll notice from the risk register that we've actually incorporated that now alongside risk. So we're actually allocating a category or risk type to each corporate risk now. What our intentions are moving forward is that we'll actually we'll change the layout slightly of the corporate risk register so it's organized by the categorization of risk. So you can see all the financial type risks together, for example, or the ones that impact on strategy or the ones that impact on reputation. So we'll sort of spin it a little bit and we'll have a column that aligns those risks then to corporate objectives, whereas at the minute they're sort of led by they're bundled together by corporate objective, if that makes sense. So we're going to do some work around that and we'll be reporting back to audit committee in that regard when we've completed that work. And what I'll do is I'll make sure that any appendices in the corporate risk strategy are updated in that regard as well. So the sort of templates that are appended to the back of the strategy will all be updated. So altogether, the changes to the risk strategy and the introduction of the new risk appetite framework together will enable the council to meet the needs of the council in terms of effectively managing risks and addressing audit's recommendations. So if it's okay, I'll move on to our current risk position, or has anybody got any questions before I move on to that?
Joe, if I could just
Nobody's indicating, Chair.
well, I say, could I ask a question on this?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's basically to do with the with page 184, and also let me turn it over to 197. It's to do with the alignment of and the construction of which committee and who reports to what. If we go to page 184, at the top of the page, it says to hold the Audit and Governance Committee and CLT accountable for the effective management of risk. Well, are we going to have a new governance committee, or are we going to be renamed Audit and Governance Committee? You see what I mean? I'm a bit unsure on that, especially when it comes to accountability.
Yeah, apologies for that, Chair. That's that the labelling of the audit committee needs to, the word governance needs bringing out of that description there. It's an error.
Oh, I feel a lot better now, thank you. And also, could you please tell me who, or us, the CLT? Who's the corporate leadership team that it refers to? Is that us, or is that, yeah, Pete and yourself, or who is who's going to be the corporate leadership team?
So yeah, no, I'm not on corporate leadership team, although I do attend on a frequent basis. But the corporate leadership team is made up of chief executive and the service directors. So Craig Bonner, Paul Parkinson, Teresa Hodgkinson, Ruth, and then Pete Hudson as well. So that's corporate leadership team.
So yeah, I get you. So it is the real. I see what you mean with that. Finally, looking at the middle paragraph of who gets what reports presented and at what frequency, it really needs ironing out who gets what when. Yeah, I don't need, if you want me to go into any detail about it, we're talking about annual risks going to certain cabinets and committees. It's got annual review and strategic risk to this, that, and the other. And the same on page, bear with me again, troops. I'm sorry, I'm trying to be as quick as I can. If I go on to page 197, right at the bottom, it contradicts itself slightly, in my opinion, and saying that reports quarterly to the CLT and 6 monthly to cabinet. It's not very coherent. I think you really think you ought to have a look at that.
I agree, Chair. Thank you for bringing that to my attention.
Okay. Right, I've had me
we'll make sure that it's consistent throughout. It is our intention to report on a quarterly basis to Cabinet and to Audit Committee, particularly with the impacts of the pandemic upon our risks, which is what I'll get to next in terms of our current corporate risks.
Great, thank you, Joe. I think you've answered my question. Did you want to carry on with more of your presentation?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Okay. So my last couple of slides relate to our current risks in the corporate risk register. As is mentioned in the report, since the pandemic hit us, we've actually, well, I say we, the organisation with myself with CLT, we've reviewed our corporate risk register and the risks that sit within that, particularly reflecting the impact of the pandemic. And there have been additional risks new risks added to the risk register in that regard. But there are also, we've noted some existing risks in the risk register that were particularly impacted by the pandemic as well. And I've brought some of those to your attention on this slide. So, for example, we already had a risk on the register which related to the introduction of universal credit and the impact that would have on our ability to collect rent. There's more detail in the report, but in a nutshell, this is now being impacted by the pandemic as well. So we've seen a significant 40% increase in the number of tenants that are claiming universal credit, and we're expecting that to rise even further. So the key impact of that, like I say, is our ability to collect rent, but also our ability to undertake any enforcement action for rent arrears as well. Yeah. Which the pandemic has had an impact upon. The report does contain specific figures up to the end of December, just to raise that as this was a significant risk anyway, but it's now been impacted by the pandemic too. The other one in relation, which is quite closely related, is the sustainability of the HRA business plan. Again, impacted by the rent arrears and collection of rent, but also our ability to turn around void properties as quickly as possible so that we can get rental income coming in. The turnaround of void properties was also picked up in the recent corporate plan performance update report to Cabinet last week, where we'd identified that particularly during the first half of this financial year, the pandemic had a significant impact on being able to turn around repairs to void properties, particularly major repairs. And then the other thing in this regard, in terms of HR business plan as well, is that there's some new legislation that's coming out with some requirements that will have a potential impact on financial pressures of the HRA business plan, where there's estimated spends in relation to increasing thermal efficiencies of our properties and also installing carbon monoxide alarms into their properties. So there's, as you can see, there's an estimate of what those costs are going to be in the longer term. So not in the short term, but at least we're building that in. And then finally, I put this in green because it's the risk particularly increased, but it is impacted by COVID, and that's our commercial property investments, and we've already spoken about them in reports this evening. But at the moment, those investments, the tenants are paying their rents in accordance with their contracts. So I put that one in green rather than red because it's not so negative. So in relation to the review of our corporate risk register and the impact of the pandemic, 8 new risks have actually been added to the register, and most of those are in relation to the impacts of pandemic. So we've got the list there in front of you, things like impact on reduced resource levels and capacity, absences related to COVID, our ability to make good decision making and governance, you know, the fact that the pandemic throws us a little bit into a whirl in terms of making decisions within normal governance structures. Loss of key income sources. I mentioned rent, but there's other income sources like business rates, council tax. Data protection, a possible spike in risk around data loss due to remote working. Statutory obligation process delays. So that does relate to particularly to our housing teams, for example, making sure gas servicing is undertaken in a timely manner. Having an effective coronavirus recovery plan, and then the one that doesn't actually tie into impacts of pandemic directly is our ability to deliver the town centre funding that we've been successfully awarded. And then finally, just a slide just to summarise the risk ratings. So I've band them into significant, medium, and low. You can see that in the last year or so, our position before the pandemic hit, we'd had a total of 20 risks in the corporate risk register. At year end, taking into account the impact of the pandemic, we increased that by those 8 new risks. And that stayed static at the moment. And you can see that there's just a tiny little bit of shift between medium and low classified risks. And just finally, for your attention, just the 4 risks that are in the corporate risk register that have remained in the corporate risk register at a significant level over the last 12 months are the introduction of universal credit, the failure to have an adopted local plan, the government waste strategy, and workforce planning. So that's in a nutshell. I just thought it might be useful to tie up all those 4 documents into a set of slides for members' attention.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Jo. Is that it? Are we finished, madam?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, well, can we throw this on for questions? Anyone like to, anyone wish to speak on this? Anyone have any questions? I see Councillor Jim Blagden. He's got his hand up. Over to you, Jim, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Jo, for that. You've touched on universal credit, Jo. My big worry now is, as we start to come out of this pandemic in the future, in the summer, hopefully, or towards the end of the summer, we're going to have a huge increase in universal credit. I'm absolutely sure in that. Plus, a huge loss of business around the authority, which will be, I'm sure, will be shutting. How on earth do you factor all that income loss in? It's going to be. I know you've got to react as it happens, but I don't know how you're going to factor it in.
So we are the feedback that I've had is that we are expecting universal credit claimants to increase as a result of the reduction in the furlough scheme. And like you say, quite rightly, the impact of the pandemic on businesses across the district and our ability to collect business rates as well. I'm not sure. I'm looking at Pete, I guess, in relation to those impacts being built into consideration for MTFS and such like, but they're definitely raised on the corporate risk register.
Yeah, in terms of businesses, it's something that we are actively monitoring, and we have discussed recently at corporate investment working group. At the moment, we seem to be holding our own in terms of the businesses remaining viable. There's nothing that's been flagged up at this stage that would give us any significant cause for concern, but obviously we are continuing to monitor that. Hopefully, through the grants that are being made available by the government and the businesses applying for them, they are getting that degree of support, which hopefully will see some longevity for them. And so that's effectively something that is obviously on our radar. We're actively monitoring it, and colleagues in regeneration are also involved in monitoring what's happening with businesses. Just so you're aware, it's inevitable that there will be some businesses that will fold, but it's not going to be unique to Ashfield, as I'm sure you're aware. It's all across all district, borough and unitary councils as well. But what we are doing in Ashfield, through the government's discretionary grant funding, we are setting aside a very small amount that we are going to use to support business startups and business growth, because there is a deadline on using that funding by the end of March 2022. So once we've paid out the businesses that we need to pay out from that discretionary funding, we're expecting that there will be a pot that will help us to try and help regenerate the businesses in the district through business growth and also business startups.
Okay, Jim, you want to come back on that?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. I see Councillor Arnie Hankin. Arnie, do you want to have a word?
Please, sir. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the officers again for a lovely, well-presented document. Joe, thank you for your slides. That was very, very self-explanatory. Lovely, thank you. If I could be your white knight, the both of you, we're coming through a very, very, very tight corner which nobody can see around.
No,
nobody can see around. And I do agree with Jim in one way, because there is going to be a tremendous loss of jobs and business. But it's lovely to see, Pete, that you have got the finger on the pulse. You are looking at all different avenues that you possibly can. And for me, that is very reassuring. Thank you. Thank you.
thank you, Arnie. We just have to reissue the crystal balls, mate. I think that's the top and bottom of it, don't you? Big one for me. Any more questions, please? Can I have
Councillor Shaw, Chair.
Oh, hello, Dave. Councillor Shaw, off you go, David.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can I refer back to slide 7 and the £10 million approximate that's going to be spent on the properties? Do we know what that £10 million is going to be spent on in particular? Is it going to be spent within the district, if where practicable, to actually provide some of those features and services from local businesses that could actually provide that particular product, or whatever it is, if it's windows, doors, thermal cladding, in loft insulation, whatever. And also, I'm amazed it's going to cost £480,000 for CO2 detectors. £480,000. That's a lot of money, Chair. Can we have some clarification, please?
Yeah, anyone got an answer for that? Anyone like to come in, please?
Apologies, Chair. Apologies,
Joe.
for sure. I'm not actually, I don't have the detail in terms of how the £10 million breaks down in terms of the actual components of that, and whether that work would be distributed locally rather than to, sort of outside of, to companies outside of the district. But I can follow up on that. And the same again with the carbon monoxide detectors. I don't have that level of detail, but again, I can follow up on that.
Just come back on that, Chair. I'm amazed that we haven't already got the CO2 detectors in the properties. Absolutely amazed.
Yeah.
And again, it's only approximately £10 million. Is that £10 million going to be 12 million or 14 million or 8 million? We need a ballpark figure on that. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I agree with you, David. Okay, did I see Christian with his hand up? Christian, do you want to come in, please?
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I'll just make a quick comment on the two figures that have been done. I can't give any sort of real details on the 10 million, but I do know it's a figure that was actually been studied by Paul Parkinson previously. It is a figure I have seen around talking about this. I don't know if you remember, we've also been talking about on Scrutiny Panel B about climate change and the rest of it. And, you know, one of the big things is actually going on about, and I can remember that 10 million figure coming up then, which was an estimation of cladding. So again, I don't know, it has been a study into that. It's not just like a, you know, thrilled, but I don't have the precise details on. On the carbon monoxide, actually, again, I balked it. I thought £480,000. That sounds a lot. Given we've got around 8,000 properties, that's £60 each, and that's for installation as well. And unfortunately, we all know installation costs can often far outstrip, you know, the actual costs of the items themselves. So in certain ways, that's probably not too unreasonable. And also, if again, I'm no expert in this, but I do seem to remember that carbon monoxide detectors do have to be replaced because there is a certain radioactive property within them that does wear out after a certain amount of time. So this could be a replacement. Don't quote me on any of this, but that's just a thought. If I could actually go now on to my question, Chair, which is to Joe. Obviously, we had a number of figures of like significant risks, and it actually like looks like it's going up. We started off with 4 in 2018, 2019, 12 last year, 12 this year. I think a lot of those are one related to COVID.
Yes.
And the incidents there. Also, the others, there are some external pressures that are actually effectively risks that are on us but not by us in effect. Do you actually have those figures with those two areas taken out, so actually we can have a look at the way the council's operating with risk rather than having risk imposed on us?
I've not actually worked that out for you in the report. It could actually, what we could do is we could ensure that they are tagged in the corporate risk register so that you could clearly see at a glance those risks, which what I've presented before is what I've sort of classed them as. They ought to be mitigatable by us. So the risks that are in our control, or the risks that are sort of part of the environment that we're in and less within our control. So I can actually make sure that that's included in the next version of the risk register that comes to audit committee in 3 months' time, or whenever the next one is in the early summer.
Yeah, Chair, if we could have that, I think that'll be an excellent change, because you know, we are here to audit the council, not the central government. So it's sort of I think it's a bit unfair in certain ways.
Totally agree with you, Christian. I think we should know that.
And that's it. Otherwise, thank you for the report.
Back to this at the next audit meeting and see if we can get an update on that. Would that be okay, Mike? Can we do something like that?
Yes, Chair, that's fine.
Okie dokie. Right, so I see no further hands raised. So, so could I ask for removal for the recommendations, please? Would somebody be prepared to? I see Councillor Jim Blagden. Thank you, Jim. And could I have a seconder, please? I see Councillor Christian Chapman. Thank you, Christian. So, so we'll now move to the vote. Can I ask you all to clearly raise your hands for the motion? I think that's pretty much unanimous. So there's no good. So no one's against, no abstentions. So it's clear that the vote has been carried. Thank you very much. Well, troops, that brings us to the end of the agenda. And I want to thank everybody for their attendance, officers, members, and all our interested viewers. And I'd like to call this meeting to a close, and please everyone continue to stay safe and make sure you get the jab whenever you can. See you all. Have a pleasant rest of the evening. Bye. Yeah.